This is Teresa Pablos, editor-in-chief of Dr. Bicuspid. I'm with Tom Viola, pharmacologist extraordinaire, for another episode of Dental Dose. And today we're talking about vaping, but specifically, I think vaping some weed, or as you like to say, Tom, cannabis.
Hi, Teresa. It's good to see you again. Let's talk a little bit about vaping because there's so much that we do know and so much we don't know, and especially in regard to cannabis. I thought it was a good idea to kind of tie those two together because if someone were to say to me, I'm a vapor or I'm vaping, it's almost 50-50 at this point, whether or not they're vaping some substance, could be tobacco or nicotine, that kind of thing, could be alcohol, could be marijuana. So it's kind of hard to tell what people are vaping these days. So I decided to go with marijuana, or as I call it, cannabis, just because I think it's in a unique field all of its own. I mean, you've got the potential problems with vaping itself. Okay, so what's so bad about vaping? I mean, I thought you
I
could
think
use
I'm
vape.
about to find out, huh?
Oh yeah, Viola, don't ruin it for me. Come on. I mean, I'm supposed to vape to quit smoking, aren't I? Isn't it safer to quit smoking by vaping then? I don't get it. Why would you trash this? Okay, so first of all, I was around when the first electronic cigarette was introduced in the United States. It was actually invented in 2003 by a pharmacist of no import,
Wow.
of course. But the point was, his whole job in creating that electronic device was he wanted to be able to stop smoking, and he wanted to be able to deliver nicotine to his lungs to squelch his craving for nicotine without combusting tobacco plant material. Okay, because we all know combustion leads to the release of thousands of chemicals, some of which we don't even know or understand yet. We don't know what the long-term effects are. Okay, so the electronic or e-cig is born. All right. All right. Fast forward a bunch of years, and people decide that cannabis is a perfect contender for this electronic cigarette or vaping device. Because again, people have been smoking pot or igniting and combusting cannabis material for decades, right? Maybe even a century, depending on what part of the world you're looking at. And so
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, we're all well aware that when you combust and breathe in those particles, it's not very good for your health. Okay. So what's wrong with vaping? Forget cannabis, Viola. What's wrong with vaping? So what do we know about vaping? We know that in the beginning we thought, well, it's just four ingredients. It's usually water,
Mm-hmm.
maybe propylene glycol, maybe a flavoring agent, and nicotine. That's what we thought. And then we realized that the more complex the items we wanted to vape became, the greater the introduction of not so nice things into the vaping cartridge, typically heavy metals, uh,
Mm.
lead, tin, chromium, that sort of thing. What else? Known carcinogens like acrolein, and some we think carcinogens like benzene and toluene, and some not so nice things like substances we don't even know much about that we're just starting to discover now. Now, if you're saying to yourself, how come you don't know what's in the vaping cartridge, Viola? That's
You're
because
supposed to be the expert here. Yeah.
Mr. Pharmacology, right? That's what they call me. But the point is, um, it depends on who's making the cartridge,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is it something that you bought at a dispensary, the state licensed dispensary? Did you buy it black market? Did you buy it online? Who knows what the contents of that vaping cartridge can be or might be. And I'll give you just a quick example when it comes to cannabis. Cannabis that's grown under not so great conditions, especially if it's black market stuff, typically attracts mold. And so in
Oh.
order to keep the mold down, because nobody wants to inhaling mold spores, right? In order to keep the mold down, a lot of the growers will spray their plant product with moldicide, basically, something to kill mold. Okay, so, well, the problem is that those anti-mold compounds, when vaped, can turn into other compounds, one of which is hydrogen cyanide.
That doesn't
So
sound good.
it doesn't sound healthy, no. So again, vaping on its own can be hazardous based on what's in that cartridge. And don't forget the physical act of vaping can cause endothelial cell irritation in the lungs, right? In the oral cavity. It can cause problems with breathing long-term because it's not as safe as you might think. And it can cause oral manifestations up to and including the pathology we sometimes see with smoking from vaping.
Yeah. And so it sounds like vaping, you already are having some of these chemicals that, we don't exactly know what's in them. Add in even new substances, like again, cannabis with the mold pesticide, essentially,
Right.
where it's forming new chemicals and it's leading to new reactions. And because there are even chemicals that we're only beginning to think are carcinogenic, that we're still a ways away from knowing how potentially toxic it could be. Is that correct? Did I get it?
Couldn't have said it better. There's absolutely, I mean, who would have thought that I had fungicide in my vaping cartridge? I would never even think that. Right? So it's left up to what patients may or may not know about what's in the cartridge. Then add in cannabis. Cannabis in and of itself can cause problems with the oral cavity. Just to start out, not mentioning systemic health. Okay, so for example, these are the points I always like to make about cannabis. If your patient is a moderate to heavy user of cannabis, we know right off the bat there's going to be cardiovascular effects, right? It's going to be increased blood pressure and there's going to be tachycardia. And we also know what? Immunosuppression, right? So they're going to be more likely to suffer infections, not just bacterial, but also fungal and viral. So combine those two. And it really is something that we need to be concerned about. But as I started off by saying, a lot of people think, what's wrong with vaping? It's supposed to be safer than smoking. So there you go.
That makes sense. And so I think you've given some dentists a little bit more ammo for if they have a patient in their office that is like, I vape or I vape cannabis or marijuana. Is there anything else that dentists, besides using some of these facts that they're hearing now and passing it on to their patients, something they should look for or another resource in regards to specifically vaping marijuana?
Plenty of resources online. Don't know if a lot of them are reputable or not, because again, it's for the most part, this information kind of reminds me of dietary supplements in the United States. Really very little FDA oversight, unfortunately, because they're sold as supplements. So in the case of cannabis, the federal government really isn't involved per se, because cannabis at the federal level is still illegal. So the FDA does weigh in from time to time, but if I had to give one word of advice to my friends who are dentists and hygienists and assistants, it would be this: please be on the lookout for pathologies. Look out for the pathologies you would normally look for and some you wouldn't consider. And just to give you one example, most modern vape pens operate at temperatures between 350 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So imagine the morphologic changes you might see just in the palate alone when the mouth is being essentially blasted with a furnace, every couple of minutes. If you can get your head wrapped around that, then I think you can see, wow, there's a lot to be looking for you.
That's a crazy thought. That's very hot. That is incredible. And so for all of you watching at home, you have some new ammo to talk with your patients about, some new things to look for. And if you're interested in learning more about cannabis and marijuana, that was actually one of our first episodes of Dental Dose. So that will be linked to in one of the related reading stories below. Well, excellent. Thank you so much again, Tom. It was great to talk with you and to learn a little bit more about vaping and marijuana. Be sure to watch Dental Dose on the next episode when it airs on Dr. Bicuspid. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.